bombshell doesn't seem like the right word. A crazy piece of reporting has just dropped, and it's led to calls for North Carolina Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson to drop out of the race before this story even broke. People have known about it all day, and now we have it. Now we know what it says. The reporting is from CNN. It has not at this point been independently verified by NBC News, but it says that Robinson made dozens of very disturbing comments on a porn site between 2008 and 2012 before he entered politics. The comments include Robinson, the current lieutenant governor, proclaiming that he is, quote, a black Nazi, and saying he, quote, wishes they would bring slavery back. I would buy a few, end quote. CNN also reports this, quote, the comments were made under a username that CNN was able to identify as Robinson's by matching a litany of biographical details and a shared email address. Many of Robinson's comments were gratuitously sexual and lewd in nature. He reportedly describes himself as a, quote, perv, and describes peeping on women in public gym showers. Now, even ahead of the story breaking, he issued a robust denial of the story and responded this afternoon ahead of it by posting this video.
Let me reassure you, the things that you will see in that story, those are not the words of Mark Robinson. You know my words, you know my character, and you know that I have been completely transparent in this race and before. Clarence Thomas famously once said he was the victim of a high-tech lynching. Well, it looks like Mark Robinson is too, by a man who refuses to stand on stage and debate me about the real issues that face you. Instead, they want to focus on salacious tabloid lies. We're not going to let them do that. We are staying in this race. We are in it to win it.
So, lots of layers here, right? The sex stuff, which is too lewd to read to you, exceeds my skill set as a cable news anchor. But given how important North Carolina is and where the polls are right now at the top of the ticket, the national presidential level, and given how central it is to both candidates' path to the White House, it's significant, that last thing that he says there, that he's, quote, not dropping out of the race. And this isn't his first scandal, right? He's someone who says, quote, some people need killing. He's trashed the civil rights movement. And Trump describes him this way, as MLK on steroids. That's a quote. Deadline to drop out is midnight. TikTok. We're back with Cornell, Michael, and Alicia. Michael Steele, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Okay, so this was the line. This was the line. Republicans, this answer. So this was the line you're drawing now, where the Trump campaign and the North Carolina Republican Party is like, oh, he got to go. This is the line. The porn site and the black Nazi stuff, that was the line. So the killing people wasn't a problem. All the other stuff he said before now wasn't a problem, as you embraced this man and raised him above your head and say, he is us. Well, he is you, North Carolina Republicans. This is who you nominated. You knew all this stuff about him. We got videos going back years on this boy, on this man. Give me a break. Give me a break. And so here's the rub. The numbers in North Carolina show that the Democratic nominee for president has not only spanked Donald Trump on the debate stage, but is spanking Republicans in the state of North Carolina. And that race has tightened up to the point where she now has strong leads in areas they didn't think would be possible. So that's why the GOP and the Trump campaign are now throwing this stuff up here saying he's got to go. He's got to go. So this is your line. And this is only your line because you're losing the state. Because otherwise you'd be perfectly fine with all of this, because you were fine with it before the poll numbers started going against you. Yep. That's how cynical and corrupt this process has become for Republicans.
Please don't say spank again. Cornell, let me show you, because I think this is my question editorially all day. What could be on the tapes? Because this makes Mastriano look like a statesman, right? I mean, this makes the worst MAGA candidates of the last cycle truly look normal. Let me show you what was on the other side of the line, what did not lead to calls to resign. Here's Robinson saying, quote, some people need killing.
We now find ourselves struggling with people who have evil intents. You know, there's a time when we used to meet evil on the battlefield, and guess what we did to it? We killed it. Some liberal somewhere is going to say that sounds awful. Too bad. Get mad at me if you want to. Some folks need killing. It's time for somebody to say it.
Let me show you more. This is because this is someone importantly, back to the presidential race, that Donald Trump, let me show you what Donald Trump thinks of this man.
This is Martin Luther King on steroids. Okay, now, I told that to Mark. I said, I think you're better than Martin Luther King. I think you are Martin Luther King ×2.
So Donald Trump thinks this man is Martin Luther King ×2. This is what he says. I'm going to read it to you about the civil rights movement. Quote, this is Mark Robinson again. Take a look at the so-called civil rights movement of the 60s, how the socialists, how the communists use that to manipulate people in this country, how they use it to subvert capitalism, and how they use it to subvert free choice and where you go to school and things like that. You look at what they did with it. I mean, it's amazing that people can't see it. I mean, so many things were lost during the civil rights movement. So many freedoms were lost during the civil rights movement that shouldn't have been lost. You know, an absolute backward view of history, Cornell, but that wasn't on the side of the line that's been crossed today with whatever has transpired on the Pornhub.
You know, I just want to underline everything that Michael Steele said here, and look, it's not hard to believe. Why is this story a stretch, right? That he called himself a black Nazi. He's been if you take him or look at everything he's already said, from killing people to attacking the civil rights movement, right? Why is this so out of place that he refers to himself as a black Nazi? I don't think it's out of place at all. I want to step back though for a moment here, because there's something when you look at candidates like this, and you go out to Arizona and look at the candidate that they had running now twice, and in Pennsylvania, these candidates that you've mentioned, you know, there is a deterioration of values and civic values happening that I want to say is certainly happening under Donald Trump, and maybe Donald Trump, you know, opened the door to. But I'm not even being partisan here. But once upon a time, Nicole, you know, these candidates that are now being blessed and okayed by Donald Trump, they would not have had a chance in heck of being at the top of anyone's ticket in the Republican Party or the Democratic Party. And now all of a sudden you have these people who are extremists and outside of our value set and say all these crazy things about women and attack women and attack minorities and undermine our values. Now they are mainstreamed in Donald Trump's Republican Party. That it's step back from it. There's something much sadder and something much sicker happening, that now these sort of candidates are okay. Well, at least okay, and they come out of Republican primaries and they represent the Republican Party. And again, I don't even want to be partisan here, because I think it's a sickness on the American political system and our values, and that whether you're Democrat or Republican, you got to look at what's happening in our politics and say, we've got to move this in a different direction. We've got to clear America's of this sort of angry extremist cancer that is taking over certainly at least one half of our political parties.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it also argues for the need to eradicate both sidesism in talking about the two parties, right? One party is so sick that the line for maybe getting rid of someone is between, you know, the things he said about his, you know, arousal level and the kind of porn he watched on a porn site, and being a black Nazi, and talking about how some people need killing, right? The line is between those two things.
Right.
And the other one had arguably the most successful modern president, right, atop the ticket after a performance that shook Democratic leaders to the core. That party went through a public and excruciating process. He stepped down, and there's now a new person running it. I mean, the health of the parties is as stark of a contrast as any two things in our country.
Right. Why are we so surprised about the things this man said in private, given the things that he was willing to say in public to a huge crowd, knowing that he was being videotaped? And part of what was so alarming about, the time he was talking about how people need killing is he wasn't entirely clear about who it was that he was talking about. It sort of ran the gambit from some biblical talk of evil to then talking about communists and socialists, and to your point about the comparison, should have been a question of mental acuity and wellness at that point, that there was not. But there's no willingness to engage in these hard questions. This also, to me, is a reminder of elections are fluid, right? Pennsylvania is already voting. North Carolina, people get to start early voting in about a month. When we say we have this many days until Election Day is happening right now, and there is any number of variables in these states nationwide that can change the contours of all these races.
That's such a good point. Cornel, just tell me where you think the race is, sort of behind the headlines, behind the polls, between Harris and Trump in North Carolina.
I tell you this, and I have not seen North Carolina truly tied in a toss-up, even in some of the sort of our internal numbers since 2008. I think we're going to win. I think we're going to win North Carolina, and I think, yes, we're going to win North Carolina. I'm going on record. We're going to win she's going to win North Carolina.
Melissa and Charles, it's great to have two people who've been on the road talking to voters about the exact topics we need to go into tonight. First, let me start with your reaction to this Oprah event that is, I believe, still going or just wrapping up, Melissa. I understand the inclination to do an event with Oprah. If Oprah called me, it wouldn't matter what it was about. I would go do it with her. And certainly there are a lot of stars lined up in this event. I do wonder, though, in terms of ginning up enthusiasm where she most needs it, do you think Oprah makes a difference?
Well, I'm just going to say I think it's a real missed opportunity if Oprah Winfrey doesn't tell every woman in that crowd to look under her seat because you get a democracy, you get a democracy, you get a democracy. Missed opportunity. I don't know if Oprah's going to play well with the demographic of young black men who are perhaps skeptical or maybe Trump curious, but I do think it makes clear that there is support within the black community, and that could be very important in translating to young black men, like their mothers, their grandmothers are all doing this, like everyone in the community is behind this. Maybe there's a reason for that, and maybe I should investigate or interrogate why I am not quite in line yet.
Can you expand on that, Charles? Is that like that sort of family dynamic, the matriarchy coming together and being like, you will vote for Kamala Harris, young black man in my family?
It does exist, and I think that in quite simple terms, that may be part of the problem because of the conversation and the way it's being had. There are a number of black men who I and Tremaine spoke to on the course of filming Black Men in America, The Road to 2024, who expressed a sense of part of the issue that they are having is the way that people are talking to them about their vote, as opposed to having conversations with them. A lot of black men have expressed feeling like folks are talking at them and castigating them for having questions, for having apprehension, for wanting to reservations, wanting to see some policy before they make a decision and commit. And so at the end of the day, you're still talking about men. And so there's a feeling in some respects of, hold on, who are you talking to like that? Well, you can't sort of shame me to the polls. That is not an effective strategy.
And you could see that in her response at the NABJ conference when she said, look, I don't take them for granted. I know I need to earn it. That seems like she's reading from the same hymnal that you're reading from, which is, don't tell people they have to vote for me. Don't shame them into it. I got to earn it.
Give me a reason why. And I think that part of the problem with Democratic messaging for some people has been, you have been selling me a vision of less last, meaning that I've survived Donald Trump one, and now you're telling me that this is going to be worse. But at the same time, you told me the same thing about George Bush. You told me the same thing about Ronald Reagan. And I'm still here. I'm not saying it's valid. I'm not saying it's valid, but I'm saying that if, for example, I'm a black male who has only seen the unemployment rate in this country be surpassed by Native American men and no other demographic, selling me a vision of less last is not necessarily the best way to go.
But again, I think one of the things that we saw when we went around the country talking to black women, it's not just black men who have questions. I think young black women also have questions.
Sure.
So women of my age and older, they are solidly in that camp. And they were even before the switch. Like, we talked to women who said, I will vote for Joe Biden's desiccated body if it comes to that. But these younger women are, they have questions. And one of the things that's really interesting to me is, they talked about some questions about police brutality. What has the Biden administration done around police brutality? And in fact, the Biden administration has done a lot around police brutality. One of the most historic executive orders, putting money into policing and police accountability. We don't really talk about that on the media because we've spent the last year covering January 6th and Trump's trials and whatnot.
Well, and police brutality, the appalling footage of police brutality continues to be generated independent of the Biden administration.
But here's another part of it, and this came out very clearly, and I think it's the same with black men. It occurred to me that this is the generation of people who grew up in schools after No Child Left Behind. So they grew up in an educational system where we were divested of music and PE and civics education. So they may not understand as clearly as other people in the media and law or whatnot that the president has very limited power over the 18,000 police departments in the country. That's a municipality and a locality issue. And so part of this, they want to see change, but they're looking to the president, and maybe that's not the person who's going to do this. So we really have to think about the way in which our electorate is being educated, what it means downstream, because this isn't just about black men. I think we're going to see this further down the line with lots of different groups.
Well, and when you account for the educational divide, that's where you're seeing the biggest cleave towards Trump. I got to say, though, there's like the case for the positive case for voting for Harris. Then there's also the case for voting for Harris as an antidote to Trump.
Sure.
And I got to wonder what you guys think of the rhetoric coming out of Springfield, directed at Springfield, Ohio. It's something that Oprah Winfrey brought up actually this evening, just a few minutes ago. I think we have the clip, if we could play it for you guys, so you can hear how she's framing it.
Ever since the debate, we feel for our fellow citizens in Springfield. Do you not think about the fellow citizens in Springfield, Ohio, the Haitian families, the non-Haitian families, everybody having to deal with this lie that has endangered the lives of Haitian people and anybody who looks Haitian? Everybody in America feels for that.
Okay, the key part of that, I think, is everybody having to deal with this lie that has endangered the lives of Haitian people and anybody who looks Haitian. Mm-hmm. We had the chair of the local NAACP chapter on yesterday, Charles, and she was saying how her grandchildren can't go to school. She's worried about them. They're not Haitian, they're black. Mm-hmm. And I got to wonder, one of the areas where Kamala Harris loses the most ground to Donald Trump is on immigration and the economy. Just to talk about immigration for a second, when you hear his rhetoric around immigration, when you hear how he's vilifying people of color in the United States, they could be Haitian, they could just be black, is that not a deterrent? Do you think that that matters when, in your experience, and granted this is before any of the Springfield stuff came up, but is that the kind of stuff that is going to make it's going to penetrate, young black men and their sort of like their information bubble?
I think the notion of Donald Trump as someone who is a racist is not something that's new or foreign to young black male voters. I think that with respect to what we're seeing in Springfield and what we saw there with those comments, it needs to be framed more broadly, and it needs to be framed under the umbrella of white nationalism. And the reason for that is because racism is one lane, but when you're talking about white nationalism, now you invite xenophobia, you invite a number of different isms into the picture to other people. And the reason why that becomes critical is because it's not just a conversation that black people or Haitian people or people who are dark-skinned Dominicans or dark-skinned Cubans need to be worried about. It is a conversation that if you are not a wealthy, straight, white male, you can be othered under this notion of white nationalism, because it is a virus that spreads, and it is a virus that Donald Trump has no problem unleashing, along with J.D. Vance, on the entire electorate. And so because of that, you have to expand the framing so that people understand this is not just a racial issue that extends to people who might appear to be Haitian in some way. This is something that potentially has the ability to affect all of us who can be othered.
the white nationalism frame, I think, also encompasses some of the issues that Harris is actually really good on, like abortion. Like, one of the things that really hasn't been talked about enough is the way in which this anti-abortion rhetoric is also accompanied by replacement theory. Like, there's a reason why you want to stop women from terminating their pregnancies, certain women, and there's a reason why you're fine with certain women like Amber Thurman bleeding out in parking lots. And so the worst effects of these abortion bans are going to be visited on poor women, women of color. We're seeing that. And it's now that it's also spreading to women who look like random suburban moms. And now it's becoming a real issue. But it's always been an issue for women of color. And she's made that very clear. And I think joining it to this broader message about white nationalism makes both of these issues salient. And there's a real choice here.
I mean, it also is aided by the fact that there are neo-Nazis marching in Springfield, right? When you talk about white supremacy, and they're explicitly talking about the Great Replacement Theory as now a form of Republican orthodoxy. So the data points are there. It's just people maybe connecting them to the candidates.
Kamala Harris was walking our picket lines while Donald Trump was crossing them.
For us in the labor movement, it's real simple. Kamala Harris is one of us.
Some of the largest workers' unions representing millions of people across this country have endorsed Vice President Kamala Harris and her pro-labor policies. There's one notable exception, however, the Teamsters. Yesterday, their executive board decided for the first time since 1996 not to endorse a candidate for president. That decision did not sit well with some local chapters across the country, which announced their own endorsements for the Harris-Walz campaign, including in battleground states like Michigan, Nevada, and Wisconsin. Joining me now is Gregory Floyd, president of the Teamsters Local 237, which represents employees working in government agencies in New York City and Long Island. Greg Floyd, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me on.
So your the national organization did not endorse. Why did your organization endorse?
Well, when we looked at the polling, and they gave me my polling, the majority of our members in that poll wanted us to endorse Kamala Harris. And I said, we were all told if we wanted to make a local endorsement, we can. I immediately made a local endorsement. Why? It was the right thing to do because we know what the Biden-Harris administration did for labor. And I got a lot of calls from our members saying, we're proud that you did that. We were afraid that no one was going to stick up for Kamala Harris.
Yeah. And let me just go through it. I mean, the record of the two are very different. We know that President Biden walked a picket line. We know that the policy of the Biden-Harris administration were about the CHIPS Act, bringing jobs, doing lots of job growth. We now see inflation down. We see a lot of positive sort of policy outcomes. Here's Trump's record. He changed the rules to make it harder to qualify for overtime. He opposed legislation raising the national minimum wage to $15 an hour. He repealed regulations that protected vulnerable workers from amassing debts from payday loans. He gave tax incentives that encouraged companies to move jobs overseas, and he made it harder for workers to join a union. Can you explain, given that, why your national organization would be ambivalent about endorsing one or the other?
I really can't explain that. It's inexplicable. There are just individuals that may not know all the facts. We should tell them, and even if you tell them, look, there are people who you tell things to, and I never grew up in the age like we're growing up in. The facts are right in front of your face, and yet people tell you you're not seeing what you're seeing.
Yeah.
January 6th, there's some people that say it wasn't a riot. I know what I saw. I know what happened. And people are telling us it didn't happen. So, I mean, I would never think that we live in an age where people say, are you going to believe your lying eyes or me?
Yeah.
So that's where we are. And I believe some members didn't understand the significance of an endorsement. There are possibly 2 Supreme Court nominees that could come before the next president. We know what the other 3 nominees did. We had Janice come. There were so many things besides a president that's attached to an endorsement. It's not just the individual, it's the policies, it's the appointments, it's the future. It could shape us for the next 50 years. I won't be around. It won't affect me. But I don't want anybody to say, you know what, Gregory Floyd had an opportunity to do something, and he stood silent. So when I come with conviction, I know what I'm making an endorsement about, and I know why I'm doing it, and I can explain my point. So if I have everybody lined up against me, I'll get in the room, and I won't leave that room till I explain my point. Maybe I'll change one mind. Maybe I'll change two. But I am going to explain my point, why I did it.
That is so well said. I mean, and everyone can hear from your accent that you are a New Yorker. You're a New Yorker.
I'm a New Yorker.
Donald Trump's a New Yorker. He's from Queens. What do you
I'm from
make
Queens
of the
too.
What do you make of the fact that, at least in my experience, the people who are the most opposed to him fundamentally are New Yorkers? What do you think that's about?
What's that about? Okay, I'll tell you what it's about. We know who he is. We grew up. I grew up in the age of Central Park. I know Yusef Salaam, the Central Park Five. I knew what they went through, and when it was proven that they were innocent, Donald Trump continued to this day to persecute them. He's a persecutor. He continues to this day to persecute them, even though they've been found innocent and the evidence said they didn't do it. And when you look at that and you know what happened in 1989 with these young men, and they look no different than I, in the same city as I, except I didn't grow up in Manhattan and I wasn't in Central Park. It could have been me if I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. So I understand who he is. When he talks about Barack Obama wasn't born here and birtherism, he's talking about me. Anything he says that I know he's talking about me. And if I go along with it, I dishonor my parents and everyone who came before me. So when you tell me that we're New Yorkers and why we're opposed to him, because we know who he is.
Yeah. And I mean, you talk about his mistreatment of workers all happened in New York. I mean, and he's bragged with Elon Musk. He laughed about the idea of Elon Musk being the best at firing people. It is amazing to me that any working person would be for him. And it blows my mind.
Because it's not happening to them. It's far and removed. These are people that I never see. It's not my problem. I turn my back until it becomes your problem. And then they'll come and say, well, why did you endorse this man? You know, he wasn't for us. And I said, but this is what you wanted us to do.
Yeah.
But sometimes you have to tell people what the right thing is.
Gregory Floyd, thank you so much. Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Teamsters Local 237 President Gregory Floyd, thank you.
Republicans are positively freaking the heck out. You see, the deadline to withdraw from the state's gubernatorial election is 4 hours from now. The state Republican Party really wants its candidate, Mark Robinson, to drop out. Even by the standards of Donald Trump's hand-picked freaks and geeks, Mark Robinson is a uniquely terrible candidate. He's got a open history of rank anti-Semitism, along with a bunch of other bigoted statements. He's made grotesque anti-abortion ads accusing women of not being responsible enough to keep your skirt down. Just 2 weeks ago, he had to deny a report that he was once a 5 nights a week attendee at multiple porn shops where he often brought a pizza into a private booth with him. All that had been a known quantity. Seemed fine with Trump and his party. And yet, this afternoon, we started to hear this chatter that Republicans, including members of the Trump campaign, had suddenly decided it was time for Robinson to go. And then we learned why. Around 3:30 p.m., CNN dropped a report that Robinson made a series of inflammatory comments on a pornography website's message board more than a decade ago, in which he referred to himself as a, quote, black Nazi and expressed support for reinstating slavery. The extensive and thorough report by the excellent reporters at CNN provides overwhelming evidence that Mark Robinson was indeed the one making the comments on the website Nude Africa, including the fact that he signed up for an account using his actual name, Mark Robinson. He used the same username and email address for other accounts on multiple other websites. In the report, Robinson says he wants to own slaves and calls himself a Nazi, wrote that he preferred the former leader of Nazi Germany, Adolf Hitler, over the leadership in Washington during the administration of Barack Obama. I'd take Hitler over any of the expletive that's in Washington right now. Also, Robinson graphically described his own sexual arousal as an adult from the memory of secretly peeping on women in public gym showers as a 14-year-old. Robinson recounted the story as a memory he said he still fantasized about. What's more, Robinson said he enjoyed watching transgender pornography, a review of archived messages found in which he also referred to himself as a, quote, perv. Now, of course, it is our position, strongly here on this program, consenting adults in a free country should be free to produce and consume any kind of pornography should they want to. Transgender pornography obviously included. It does, however, present a stark contrast with what Robinson says now about LGBTQ folks.
There's no reason anybody anywhere in America should be telling any child about transgenderism, homosexuality, any of that filth. And yes, I called it filth.
Does seem to be a bit of a filth expert. In an interview tonight, Robinson denied that any of the messages belonged to him.
This is not us. These are not our words, and this is not anything that is characteristic of me, nor has it ever been.
How do you explain all of the matching details on this profile? The profile on Nude Africa lists your full name as Mark Robinson. The email listed on the account is an email that you have used elsewhere on the internet, including with your photo. You have used that name, Mini Soldier, on multiple social media accounts, including Twitter, Pinterest, Black Planet, and YouTube. How can you deny, with all of these matching details, that this is you?
Look, I'm not going to get into the minutia of how somebody manufactured these salacious tabloid lies.
We should also note that the report uncovered some very specific language used in the posts at issue. Uncommon phrases such as gag a maggot, dunderhead, I don't give a frog's ass, and I don't give two shakes of it. They were used by the account on Nude Africa and by Mark Robinson on his personal Facebook page. Also, according to the report, Robinson spoke admirably about the KKK, implying he would join if the hate group allowed black members, made disparaging remarks about Martin Luther King Jr., calling him a racial slur and an effing commie bastard. More than a bit ironic, considering what Trump likes to say about his good friend Mark Robinson.
I said to this man, and when he endorsed me, he gave a speech, and I said, you are Dr. Martin Luther King on steroids. That's how good you are. You are unbelievable as a speaker. And he got up, and he's doing fantastically well in North Carolina, and I think he's going to be the next governor of North Carolina, Mark Robinson.
I don't know if I'd put money on that bet right now. In fact, Donald Trump and his family have said a lot of nice things about the man who called himself a black Nazi and reportedly praised Hitler.
Thanks as well to, I think, one of the hottest politicians in the United States of America, and who's become a friend of mine, Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson. Thank you, Mark. We have to be very, very careful. We have to cherish Mark. He's a star. You have to cherish him. Amen. It's like a fine wine, because that's what you have. You have a fine wine. He's an outstanding person. I've gotten to know him so well and fairly quickly. I want to thank a very good man, and he's in there fighting. He's fighting, and we know he's a fighter. The next governor of North Carolina, Mark Robinson. Thanks, Mark.
Well, listen, we know them. We know them well. We know Mark very well. Amazing guy. But Mark is a wonderful person, a wonderful guy, a person I've gotten to know very, very well. And I think not only are we going to win the state, I think he's going to win the state.
It now seems as though Donald Trump might be trying to distance himself from the fine wine of a candidate. At least according to the Carolina Journal, citing an anonymous source, Robinson is under pressure from staff and members of the Trump campaign to withdraw from the governor's race. And that earlier this week, leaders in the Trump campaign privately told Robinson he was not welcome at rallies for Trump or vice presidential candidate J.D. Vance. He was slated to speak at the Vance appearance on Wednesday, but his office announced that Robinson had tested positive for COVID. Now, Robinson's pretty far down the polls, while the top of the ticket is locked in a tie in North Carolina. And to be clear, the deadline for Robinson to withdraw is today. He's got less than 4 hours as of now. State law says candidate can pull out of the race up until the day before absentee ballots start to go out for overseas service members. Those ballots go out tomorrow. Robinson's name is already on them. But according to Robinson, doesn't matter anyway because he is not going anywhere.
Let me reassure you, the things that you will see in that story, those are not the words of Mark Robinson. Clarence Thomas famously once said he was the victim of a high-tech lynching. Well, it looks like Mark Robinson is too. We are staying in this race. We are in it to win it. And we know that with your help, we will.
I, for one, feel reassured. Now, let's just take a step back here. Maybe Mark Robinson is the most extreme version of the anti-social MAGA candidate. But is he really that much more extreme than J.D. Vance, who's just spent the last 2 weeks spreading essentially blood libel about Haitian residents of his home state? And what about Donald Trump, who also bragged about peeping on women while they undress, to say nothing of boasting of sexual assault and then getting found liable for sexual abuse by a jury? The guy who broke bread at his home with a man who praised Hitler and an avowed white supremacist. This is the Republican Party under Donald Trump. I gotta say, North Carolina Republicans, I think it's gonna be a little hard to return your candidate now, you know? You broke it, you bought it. Mark Robinson's your guy.
Liz Cheney's father served as the vice president to the president, who was also the 46th governor of Texas, George W. Bush. And it is the Texas Republicans who supported that governor that Liz Cheney is appealing to now. But not just in the presidential campaign. Excuse me. Liz Cheney has endorsed exactly one Senate candidate, our next guest, Congressman Colin Allred, who is running against Ted Cruz.
I served with Colin. I know him. I know what kind of a congressman he's been. I watched him. As you said, we were on opposite sides of issues and opposite sides of the aisle. Not every issue on opposite sides, but I also know Ted Cruz. You know, I've known him for over 20 years, and I know that he will say anything if it serves his own political purpose. And the nation is at a moment where we need public servants who are men and women of goodwill, who are men and women who will do the right thing. We need serious people in office, and the choice for the people of Texas is just a very clear one. And in this race, I want to do everything I can to help ensure that the people of Texas elect Colin Allred.
The latest poll in the Texas Senate campaign has Congressman Allred at 42% and Senator Ted Cruz at 47%, a race that is effectively tied inside the margin of error. That still leaves 11% of the vote available. And when an incumbent is polling below 50%, that incumbent is in trouble because historically, more of the undecideds tend to break for the new candidate. Joining us now is Congressman Colin Allred, the Democratic Senate nominee in Texas. Congressman, welcome to The Last Word. So tell us, how did this endorsement come about? Who reached out first?
Well, Liz and I have stayed in touch, and she's a friend. We served together, but she's fundamentally a patriot. And from January 6th forward, she has been so consistent, and she's done something that's really unique in American politics, of putting country over party, country over self-interest. And she also knows that Ted Cruz was the architect of the attempt to overturn the last presidential election. And so in addition to knowing us being friends and knowing that, how we work together, she also knows what a danger he is. And so that's why I'm proud to have her support. And I want every principled conservative in Texas to know that they can be part of our coalition.
Well, let's listen to more of what Liz Cheney, former Congresswoman Liz Cheney, had to say. Let's watch.
When I watch the kinds of things that we saw Ted Cruz do after the 2020 election in particular, his willingness to do whatever Donald Trump wanted him to do, including proposing this completely unconstitutional plan that would have resulted in throwing out electoral votes, throwing out the votes of millions of Americans, something that, as I said, was unconstitutional. And Ted Cruz was one of the leaders of that in the Senate. It's just dangerous.
Congressman, this sounds personal to Liz Cheney. Do you feel like that message is resonating with Texas voters?
Well, I think it is personal for her because she believes strongly in the Constitution. And, if you're a true conservative, you believe in the rule of law, you believe in the Constitution, and you stand up for those things. And that's what Ted Cruz tried to overturn in 2020. And so it certainly, I think, is resonating because there are so many folks in Texas who I think feel similarly. And these are also some of the folks who elected me to Congress, folks who maybe voted for George W. Bush or voted for Mitt Romney, but who are looking around and not seeing their values reflected in this version of the Republican Party. That's also how we're going to beat Ted Cruz, is building this broad coalition of Democrats, yes, but also independents and Republicans like Liz.
All right, Congressman, this is when I knew that your race seriously was one to watch. And I mentioned that it's not great when an incumbent is polling below 50%. Donald Trump's own co-campaign manager, Chris LaCivita, posted this online on Saturday, timestamp 4:18 a.m. What the hell is wrong with the Senate race in Texas? I think I know, and I think I know his name. Time to get some real professionals in to save Ted Cruz. This led to a lot of folks to believe he was talking about Cruz's campaign manager, Jeff Rowe. I bring all that up. It sounds like you've got Washington Republicans worried.
Well, they should be. I mean, there was a poll today that actually showed me leading in the race, and we're going to beat Ted Cruz. But polls only say so much. What we have to do in Texas is to get folks out to vote. And so that's why I hope folks will text Texas to 90678. Get involved with this campaign. Help us turn out the vote in Texas, because that's been one of our challenges. And when we beat Ted Cruz, it won't be a win for the Democratic Party or for just a candidate. It'll be a win for our state, because we'll get a senator who cares about all of us instead of one who just cares about himself.
Congressman Colin Allred of Texas, candidate for the United States Senate. Thank you for coming to The Last Word.
Appreciate you.
Last week's debate was another chance for Kamala Harris to introduce herself to voters. But afterwards, a new poll showed that 25% said they still need to learn more about her. Joining me now to discuss, Stuart Stevens, a veteran of the Mitt Romney and George W. Bush presidential campaigns. He is now with the Lincoln Project, and MSNBC contributor Brian Tyler Cohen. His new book, Shameless Republicans, Deliberate Dysfunction and the Battle to Preserve Democracy, is out now. This whole I need to know more about her, Kamala Harris is not running for perfect. She's running against Donald Trump. So what is it that people don't know about her when they know every possible thing there is to know about Donald Trump and still they're not sure?
It's the right question, but at this point, I think people just want to make sure that answer whatever questions they might have about her. But at this point, look, I think it's incumbent upon her to keep doing these interviews, because we know interviews, town halls, rallies, because we know that the more people learn about her, the more they like her, the more they hear from Donald Trump, the less they like him. And so, which I think is perfect, because whenever Donald Trump feels backed into a corner, the immediate strategy that he reverts to is get me in front of as many people as humanly possible. And when he does that, he says stuff like he said at the National Association of Black Journalists, which is that Kamala's not black. He says what he said at the Mar-a-Lago press conference, which is my crowd sizes are bigger than Martin Luther King Jr.'s. I have a dream speech crowd. So
hold on, he went on TV last night and was talking about how much the crowd loved him at the debate. Yep. Reality check. There was no audience. Can we talk about undecided voters? Help me, Stuart, because in my mind, when I close my eyes, I cannot picture who this person is, who is an engaged voter, who's got, a notebook in their house, like Trump did this, she did that, Trump did this, Kamala did that. Like, who are these undecided voters? Where do they live?
I think these fall into two categories. People who aren't going to vote. And people never like to tell pollsters they don't intend to vote. And when they do say that, they just get kicked out of polls. They don't continue with the questionnaires. Or they're going to be Harris voters, because Trump has his vote. They know that. There's nobody here who is thinking, well, am I going to vote for Donald Trump? The question is, he's not in the persuasion business, he's in the turnout business. And this is why I think this is going to be driven by fave, unfave. If you look at so-called undecided voters, they usually break by fave, unfave, which makes sense, because are you going to show up to vote for some candidate that you have an unfavorable opinion of? You would just stay at home. You wouldn't vote. Or you'd vote for somebody else on the ballot and leave it blank. So I think these polls are misleadingly neutral to negative for Harris, when in fact the structure of the polls are actually much better. Like what she's getting with African-American voters. They're showing her 78% or so in the Times poll. That's not going to happen. She's going to get 91% of the black vote. I mean, in 64, Goldwater got 7%. Trump got 8%. That's 1 point every 56 years. It's not going to change this year. So I think that's 11% of the polls. So I think the polls are actually better news for Harris than for Trump. And I think the Trump campaign understands this, which is why they're sort of flailing around and are panicked.
But are swing voters more significant in this election? Because you've got all those Nikki Haley voters, right? She's endorsed Donald Trump, but she's not out there campaigning with him. Yeah. Laura Loomer is. You know who Laura Loomer is not going to help Trump get? Swing voters.
Yeah. Look, I think that most of the Haley vote was a non-Trump vote. And I think that vote is very much up for grabs now. They're either not going to vote or they're going to vote for Harris. So I think this whole question, would you like to know more about somebody? If you think about it, if you got asked that question, you're going to say no. I know everything I need to know. It's a very odd question. Of course, you say, I'd like to know more. I mean, if it was a British baking show and you said, would you like to know more about a recipe? You go, yeah, I'd like to know more about the recipe. Who's going to say no? So I think it's actually surprising that that number isn't higher.
That is very interesting. When you look at the people Donald Trump is surrounding himself with right now, the things he's saying, whether it's the eating the dogs and cats, whether it's Sarah Huckabee Sanders dogging on being a step parent, if what they already have their base as fired up as they're going to get, so does Kamala Harris. If the answer is you need to win undecided voters, how is the current Republican strategy doing any of that?
It's not. I mean, the fact is that everything Donald Trump says, all of the people he surrounds himself with are just doubling, tripling, quadrupling down on the people who are already Trump fans. But I think in his mind, he is just so focused on the instant gratification of getting adulation from his fans, from his audience, the low-hanging fruit, throwing red meat out to his base because he knows he's going to get the affection from them, the applause from them immediately. That's just too much. That's just too much of a draw for him to reject in service of reaching out to those Nikki Haley voters, the people who he actually needs to be reaching out to if he wants any hope of actually winning this election. I mean, you had just alluded to the fact that the only way forward for him is actually going to be expanding his coalition by surrounding himself with the Laura Loomers of the world and making Marjorie Taylor Greene the face of the Republican Party and J.D. Vance, which was a pick that was basically just a clone of Donald Trump himself. There was no reaching out to independents. There was no reaching out to people of a different nationality or religion, even getting somebody from battleground state. All of these choices are picked from Donald Trump just to basically double down because he only knows how to reach out to the exact people who already support him.
But isn't that colossally stupid? Okay, it's being reported that I love just even thinking about this, that Pete Buttigieg is performing the role of J.D. Vance in the debate prep for Tim Walz. Yeah. What do you think of that? And how important is this debate?
I think the debate's real important. And I think Buttigieg's a great choice for that. I'm a believer in mock debates. All these debate preps I did, I think they were always better if you had someone who really took playing that person seriously. And Buttigieg is just unbelievably smart and unbelievably facile with this. And he'll be a better J.D. Vance than J.D. Vance, which is what you want. You want to walk out. It's like an athlete. You want to walk out and feel like, I practiced against guys that are better than the team that I'm playing now. I think the debate is really going to count because it's going to be one of the last times to reset what's happening inside the Trump campaign. And Brian's exactly right. What he's saying is the Trump campaign doesn't know how to reach out. And Trump really doesn't want to reach out because Trump's feeling is if you're not for him, you're a bad person. There's something wrong with you, not that there's something wrong with my candidacy or me. And when you look at the world that way, it becomes very narrow. And he's never been able to get over 47%. So I think you've got half the country is 53% non-MAGA, maybe 47% MAGA. And that's why at the end of the day, relatively speaking, I don't think this race is going to be that close. I don't think it'll be as close as 20 was.